Some secrets are never meant to be spoken aloud, because the moment they find a voice, destiny begins listening. The great hall of Ashen Ridge shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, their pale light spilling across polished stone where hundreds of wolves gathered in formal silence. Silver banners bearing the royal crest drifted gently above the crowd while musicians played a melody so soft it sounded like the moon itself had learned to breathe. Every unmated Omega in the Northern Territory stood in carefully arranged rows, each hoping that tonight would reshape a lifetime. At the very end of the final line stood Evelyn Carter, dressed in a simple pale blue gown that looked almost invisible beside the jeweled dresses surrounding her. Her hands rested calmly before her, fingers folded with practiced precision, her expression gentle, unreadable, and completely silent. For 8 years no one had heard a single word escape her lips. Children had grown into adults believing she had been born unable to speak. Elders pitied her. Young alphas barely noticed her. Others whispered that perhaps the moon goddess had forgotten to bless her with a voice. Evelyn never corrected anyone. She simply lowered her eyes and continued living inside the quiet prison she had built herself. It was safer that way. Tonight, however, the silence surrounding her felt strangely different. The arrival of Alpha King Rowan Ashford had transformed the celebration into something heavier than ceremony. The conversations faded one by one until only footsteps echoed across the immense chamber. When the massive carved doors opened, every head turned. Rowan entered without haste, dressed in a black ceremonial coat embroidered with silver thread that reflected the candlelight like frozen rivers beneath winter stars. He carried himself with effortless authority, not because of the crown resting upon his dark hair, but because every person present instinctively made room for him. His sharp silver-gray eyes swept across the hall only once, calm and unreadable, yet somehow they seemed to notice every nervous heartbeat hiding beneath polished smiles. One by one, hopeful Omegas lifted their chins, each silently wishing to become the object of his attention. Evelyn did the opposite. She looked toward the marble floor, hoping the king would pass without ever seeing her face. She had survived 8 years by becoming forgettable. Invisible people remained safe. At least that was what she had always believed. Rowan continued walking until, for reasons no one understood, his footsteps slowed. His gaze drifted past every jeweled gown, every carefully rehearsed smile, every ambitious family waiting for recognition. It settled, almost imperceptibly, upon the quiet young woman standing alone at the edge of the gathering. Evelyn felt it before she dared lift her eyes. Something about the weight of that silent attention made the air around her feel warmer. She resisted every instinct telling her to look back. Instead, she tightened her fingers together, reminding herself of the promise she had kept since she was 13 years old. Never speak. Never draw attention. Never let anyone discover the truth. Across the hall, Rowan's expression barely changed, yet the faintest hint of curiosity flickered behind his calm features, as though he had noticed something no one else could see. Before another moment could pass, a sharp gasp shattered the elegant silence, followed by frightened voices rising near the upper balcony. Every face turned toward the sound. Somewhere above, a small child had stumbled dangerously close to the edge, and for one suspended heartbeat, the entire hall froze. Even Evelyn forgot to breathe. The frightened cries echoed across the grand hall as nobles and guards instinctively looked toward the upper balcony where a little boy had lost his balance beside the polished stone railing. His mother reached for him, but she was several steps too far away. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a sudden winter wind. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Evelyn's heart pounded against her ribs with a force she had not felt in years. She saw the child's terrified eyes searching for someone, anyone to help. Her fingers trembled. 8 years of discipline fought against one desperate instinct. Stay silent. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Those words had shaped every morning and every sleepless night since she was 13 years old. Then the child slipped. Before thought could stop her, before fear could close around her throat, a single cry escaped her lips. Look out! The clear voice rang through the enormous chamber with astonishing strength, cutting through every conversation, every heartbeat, every note of music. Guards rushed forward immediately while the child's mother caught him just as he stumbled into her arms. Relief washed over the room, but it lasted only an instant before a heavier silence settled over every face present. Hundreds of eyes slowly turned toward the same person. Evelyn stood frozen exactly where she had been, her lips still slightly parted, disbelief spreading across her own face faster than anyone else's. She had spoken. She had broken the promise that had protected her for almost a decade. Murmurs spread across the hall. Some whispered her name. Others stared as though they had witnessed a ghost finding its voice. Elder Miriam frowned in confusion. Several young Omegas exchanged uncertain glances, remembering a lifetime of conversations carried only through Evelyn's gentle smiles and quiet gestures. One elderly woman covered her mouth with trembling fingers as tears filled her eyes. "She can speak," someone whispered. "She always could." The words multiplied from one corner of the chamber to another until they became a wave of astonished voices. Evelyn lowered her head, unable to bear the weight of their questions. Shame tightened around her chest, not because she had deceived them, but because she knew what came next. Once people realized she had hidden something so important, they would demand to know why. Some would never believe her answer. Others would invent stories far crueler than the truth. She closed her eyes, silently wishing she could gather that single word and bury it forever. When she finally dared to breathe again, she sensed someone approaching. Slow, measured footsteps crossed the marble floor without urgency. The whispers gradually faded. Alpha King Rowan Ashford stopped only a few feet away. Evelyn lifted her eyes just enough to see the polished black boots before, forcing herself to look higher. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, revealing neither disappointment nor anger. His silver-gray eyes studied her quietly, not with suspicion, but with the patient certainty of someone watching the final piece of a puzzle fall into place. Around them no one moved. No one dared interrupt. Rowan held her gaze for a long moment before speaking in a voice so composed that it somehow silenced the entire hall even more completely than her unexpected cry had moments before. "You have carried that burden long enough, Evelyn." Her breath caught. She had never told the king her secret. Yet the calm certainty in his eyes made one impossible truth settle over her like moonlight. Somehow, he had known all along. For several endless seconds, Evelyn could not answer. Her pulse echoed louder than the whispers surrounding her, and the silence she had protected for 8 years suddenly felt fragile, as though it could shatter beneath a single breath. She searched Rowan Ashford's face for accusation, but she found none. His expression remained calm, steady, almost reassuring. That frightened her more than anger ever could. If he truly knew, then everything she had sacrificed to remain unnoticed had already failed long before tonight. Around them, noble families exchanged uneasy glances, while the elders struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. Some looked offended by the deception. Others seemed more curious than judgmental. Evelyn noticed children peeking from behind their parents, their wide eyes filled not with fear but with innocent wonder. To them, the quiet woman they had always known had suddenly become someone entirely different. Elder Miriam finally stepped forward, gripping her silver staff with trembling hands. Her voice carried across the silent chamber with practiced authority. "Your Majesty, if this young woman has deceived every pack in the Northern Territories for nearly a decade, the council deserves an explanation." Several elders nodded in agreement. Murmurs spread again, louder this time, fueled by confusion instead of surprise. Evelyn lowered her gaze, preparing herself for the questions she had dreaded since childhood. She had rehearsed countless answers in her mind over the years, yet none seemed strong enough to survive this moment. Rowan did not look at the council. Instead, he continued watching Evelyn, as though everyone else had faded into the background. "There will be an explanation," he said evenly, "but not the one you expect." The confidence in his voice silenced the gathering once more. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes, unable to hide the confusion growing inside her. How could he possibly know more than she did? She had never met him before tonight. She had never written a letter. She had never trusted anyone outside her own family with the truth. Rowan took one measured step closer, careful not to invade her space. His voice lowered just enough that only those nearest could hear every word. 8 years ago, a healer from Cedar Hollow disappeared without warning. The official report claimed illness. The real report never reached the council. Evelyn felt the color leave her face. Her mother. Few people even remembered the tiny village where she had grown up, Yet Rowan spoke its name without hesitation. Memories rushed back with startling clarity. A modest cottage surrounded by white birch trees. The scent of fresh bread drifting through open windows. Her mother's warm hands gently pressing a finger against her lips, while whispering words that had shaped the rest of her life. Never let strangers hear your voice. Promise me, Evelyn. Promise me no matter what happens. She had promised through frightened tears without understanding why. The next morning her mother was gone, leaving only her father and a silence that slowly became part of Evelyn's identity. Rowan watched every emotion pass across her face without interrupting. He had seen recognition. He had seen grief. Most importantly, he had seen that she finally understood why he had recognized her the moment he entered the hall. Your silence was never a lie, he said quietly. It was a shield built by someone who loved you. Those words settled over Evelyn with unexpected warmth, dissolving years of hidden guilt she had carried alone. Yet before relief could fully reach her heart, the massive doors at the far end of the chamber swung open once again. A royal messenger hurried inside, his face pale with urgency, carrying an aged wooden case marked with the faded crest of Cedar Hollow. The moment Rowan saw it, his composed expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Whatever rested inside that forgotten box was about to reveal a truth that had remained buried for far longer than Evelyn's silence. The ancient wooden case rested upon a velvet-covered table at the center of the royal hall, its weathered surface marked by years of careful preservation rather than neglect. Every eye followed it as though the faded crest of Cedar Hollow carried answers no one had expected to find. The royal messenger stepped back respectfully while Alpha King Rowan Ashford approached without haste. He placed one hand upon the lid but did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked toward Evelyn. Your mother entrusted this to the crown 8 years ago, he said quietly. The words struck Evelyn harder than any accusation ever could. She remembered the morning her mother disappeared. There had been no farewell, no explanation, only the lingering scent of lavender inside their small cottage, and the feeling that something precious had quietly slipped beyond her reach. Her father had refused to answer her questions, repeating only one promise. One day, the truth will protect you better than I ever could. She had stopped asking after the first year. Hope became memory and memory became silence. Rowan carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested a folded letter sealed with pale blue wax, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, and a small leather journal worn smooth from years of careful handling. A quiet murmur spread through the nobles as Rowan picked up the letter without breaking the seal. This belongs to Evelyn, he said simply. It was never meant for anyone else. He extended it toward her. Her hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. The handwriting across the front stopped her breath. It was unmistakably her mother's graceful script. For my beloved daughter, when the time is finally safe. Tears blurred her vision before she even opened it. The hall remained completely silent except for the faint crackle of candles. Slowly, she unfolded the yellowed pages. The ink had faded slightly, but every word remained clear. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then the day I prayed for has finally arrived. If your voice has been heard, it means someone worthy was standing close enough to protect it. Never believe you were born to hide. I only asked you to disappear because there were those who feared what your gift could become. Your voice was never dangerous. Fear was. Promise me that when the right person finds you, you will never be ashamed of speaking again. Evelyn's tears slipped silently onto the paper. Every lonely year suddenly carried a purpose she had never understood. Around her, several elders lowered their heads with quiet regret. Even those who had doubted her moments earlier could hear the love woven into every sentence. Rowan waited patiently until she finished reading before speaking again. Your mother came to the palace herself. She refused wealth, protection, or recognition. She asked only one thing. Evelyn slowly looked up. She asked that if the day ever came when her daughter chose to speak instead of hide, I would make certain no one forced her back into silence. A deep stillness settled across the chamber. The Alpha King had not uncovered her secret to expose her. He had honored a promise made by a mother who believed that someday her daughter would finally be safe. Evelyn closed the letter carefully against her heart, feeling the weight of 8 forgotten years begin to lift for the very first time. Yet before anyone could speak again, Elder Miriam noticed the leather journal still resting inside the wooden case. Rowan's eyes followed hers, and for the first time that evening, genuine concern crossed his composed face. "That journal," he said softly, "contains the reason your mother believed some secrets had to remain hidden. And once it is opened, none of our lives will remain the same." With careful hands, Rowan lifted the worn leather journal from the wooden case and placed it beside the unopened letter, allowing everyone to see it without immediately revealing its contents. The cover bore no title, only a small silver crescent pressed into the faded leather. Time had softened its edges, yet it had been preserved with remarkable care. Evelyn stared at it as though it belonged to another lifetime. She had never known it existed. Every answer she had searched for as a child now seemed to rest within those weathered pages. Rowan looked toward the council before finally opening the journal. The first page contained only a single sentence written in elegant handwriting. "If my daughter is reading this beside the rightful Alpha King, then the moon goddess has answered my final prayer." Elder Miriam inhaled sharply. Several council members exchanged uncertain glances. Rowan slowly turned another page. Instead of family memories or personal reflections, the journal contained detailed observations recorded over many years. Dates, locations, names, and careful descriptions filled every page. Evelyn recognized her own childhood among the entries. Age 5. Voice soothed an injured wolf pup after a severe winter storm. Age 7. Song calmed frightened horses during the spring migration. Age 10. Young Alpha abandoned argument immediately after hearing her speak. Evelyn's hands slowly covered her mouth. She remembered each event, but she had never realized her mother had quietly documented every one of them. Rowan continued reading silently for several moments before closing the journal halfway. "Your mother was not hiding your voice because it was dangerous," he explained gently. "She was studying it because she believed it carried a forgotten blessing." Confused whispers spread throughout the hall. One elder cautiously stepped forward. "A blessing?" Rowan nodded. "Long before our generation, stories spoke of a rare Luna whose voice did not command wolves through fear or power. Instead, it restored calm wherever hearts had been consumed by grief, anger, or despair. Most believed the stories were only legends after centuries passed without another appearing." Evelyn struggled to process his words. She had spent years believing there was something wrong with her, something that forced her family into secrecy. Now Rowan was describing the very thing she had. Hidden as a gift almost forgotten by history. He gently placed the journal back onto the table before continuing. "Your mother feared that others would misunderstand what they could not explain. Some would worship such a gift. Others would attempt to control it. She wanted neither future for you." Evelyn remembered every lesson her mother had ever whispered. "Be kind. Speak carefully. Never raise your voice in anger." At the time they had sounded like simple advice from a loving parent. Now every memory carried new meaning. The hall remained silent as realization slowly spread across the gathered wolves. The deception they had judged moments earlier had never been an act of selfishness. It had been an act of protection built upon extraordinary love. Then Rowan looked directly into Evelyn's eyes. His expression remained calm, but there was unmistakable certainty behind it. "There is one final page your mother instructed only you to read." He carefully turned to the back of the journal and stepped aside. Evelyn approached with hesitant footsteps. As her eyes settled upon the final handwritten message, her breathing stopped. There, beneath her mother's signature, was a sentence that changed everything she thought she knew about her future. It read, "When the Alpha King asks you why your voice chose him first, tell him the answer has always belonged to the moon." The final sentence lingered in Evelyn's mind long after her eyes left the page. She slowly closed the journal, holding it against her chest with the same care she had given her mother's letter. Around her, the hall remained wrapped in complete silence. Every noble, every elder, every servant seemed to sense that something far greater than an old family secret had just been uncovered. Rowan stepped closer, leaving a respectful distance between them. His silver-gray eyes rested on the journal before meeting hers again. "Your mother believed the moon would choose the moment," he said softly. "She also believed neither of us should force the answer before its proper time." Evelyn searched his face for certainty. "You already knew about me," she whispered, her voice still unfamiliar after so many years of silence. Speaking felt strange, almost like learning to breathe again. Rowan gave a small nod. Not everything. Only enough to recognize what others overlooked. She frowned slightly. How? A faint smile touched his expression. 3 years ago, I visited Cedar Hollow after hearing rumors about an abandoned healer's cottage. Most people believed the stories had no value. I found records your mother left with the Royal Archives before she disappeared. She never revealed your name, but she described a child whose voice could quiet frightened hearts without demanding obedience. She asked only that the crown protect that child if the day ever came when hiding was no longer possible. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Every sacrifice her mother had made suddenly appeared in a new light. She had not disappeared because she had given up. She had spent her final years preparing a future where her daughter might one day live without fear. Why did you never come looking for me? Evelyn asked quietly. Rowan answered without hesitation. Because protection given too early can become another prison. Your mother wanted you to choose your own moment, not mine. Those words settled gently inside her. For the first time in years, she did not feel like someone who had been hidden away. She felt like someone whose freedom had been patiently guarded until she could claim it herself. Elder Miriam stepped forward again, her voice noticeably softer than before. Your Majesty, if the young woman's gift is truly what the journal describes, then what happens now? Rowan turned toward the gathered council. Nothing changes because of fear. Everything changes because of truth. He looked back at Evelyn before continuing. No law will ever require her to remain silent again. No family, no council, and no alpha has the authority to claim ownership of her voice. A quiet wave of relief spread across the chamber. Several elders bowed their heads in agreement, while others looked at Evelyn with newfound respect instead of pity. The burden she had carried for 8 long years no longer belonged to her alone. Yet as peace slowly settled over the gathering, an unexpected sound drifted through the hall. High above them, the great crystal chandelier began to shimmer with a soft silver glow unlike the warm candlelight surrounding it. One by one, smaller lanterns suspended throughout the chamber answered with the same pale radiance, illuminating the room as though moonlight itself had entered the palace. Every face lifted toward the ceiling in astonishment. Rowan remained perfectly still, but his eyes never left Evelyn. In a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke words that only she seemed meant to hear. The moon is listening now, and I believe it has finally begun to answer. The silver light continued to spread across the grand hall until every crystal, every polished column, and every ancient banner reflected the same gentle glow. It was neither blinding nor overwhelming. Instead, it wrapped the palace in a quiet warmth that seemed to settle directly within every heart present. Even the restless murmurs disappeared, replaced by a peaceful stillness unlike anything the gathering had experienced before. Elder Miriam slowly lowered herself to one knee, not out of fear, but out of reverence. One after another, members of the royal council followed her example. None of them had been ordered to do so. They simply felt that they were witnessing something sacred. Evelyn stood motionless, uncertain whether she should step back or remain where she was. The familiar instinct to disappear tugged gently at her, but another feeling, quieter and stronger, encouraged her to stay exactly where she was. Rowan watched her with calm certainty. Do you feel it? He asked softly. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment. She expected to hear distant voices or powerful magic. Instead, she noticed something much simpler. The fear that had lived inside her for 8 long years had become strangely quiet. The constant weight pressing against her chest had begun to dissolve, replaced by a peaceful confidence she could not explain. She nodded. Ido. Rowan smiled for the first time that evening, and the expression transformed the quiet strength of his face into unexpected kindness. That is what your mother wanted you to discover, he said. Your gift was never meant to control others. It was always meant to remind them of the peace they had forgotten. Evelyn slowly looked around the chamber. She noticed worried faces becoming calmer. Children who had hidden behind their parents now smiled without hesitation. Even rivals who had argued only minutes earlier now stood together in thoughtful silence. She had not commanded anyone. She had not even tried to change them. Simply standing there as herself had somehow transformed the atmosphere around her. Tears gathered once more in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. For years she had feared that speaking would bring danger into the lives of everyone she loved. Instead, her voice had become the beginning of healing. Rowan stepped toward the center of the hall and addressed every pack gathered beneath the glowing ceiling. Tonight, many believed they witnessed the exposure of a secret. They were mistaken. His voice carried with quiet authority through every corner of the palace. What you witnessed was the end of unnecessary fear. This young woman never deceived her people. She honored the promise of a mother who chose love over recognition and protection over praise. The elders bowed their heads. Several families wiped tears from their eyes. No one spoke against him. Rowan turned back toward Evelyn before continuing. From this night forward, no one will remember her for 8 years of silence. They will remember the courage it took to speak when someone else needed help. The words settled deeply within Evelyn's heart. For the first time since childhood, she no longer felt defined by what she had hidden. She was beginning to discover who she truly was. As the final echoes of Rowan's voice faded, the silver pendant resting beside the journal suddenly released a delicate shimmer. Tiny strands of moonlight circled gently around it before drifting toward Evelyn's hands. The ancient crescent glowed brighter with every passing second until a symbol unlike any she had ever seen slowly appeared across its polished surface. Rowan recognized it immediately. His calm expression gave way to quiet astonishment as he whispered almost to himself, "The forgotten Luna's mark has awakened at last." The glowing crescent pendant floated gently from the velvet table as though carried by an unseen breeze, stopping only when it rested in the open palms of Evelyn Carter. Its silver surface no longer reflected the candles surrounding it. Instead, it seemed to hold its own quiet moonlight, soft enough to comfort rather than overwhelm. The unfamiliar symbol engraved across its center pulsed with a steady rhythm, almost like a peaceful heartbeat. Every person inside the royal hall watched without speaking. No one had witnessed anything like it in generations. Rowan Ashford stepped beside Evelyn, his expression filled not with triumph but with deep respect. He did not reach for the pendant. He did not attempt to explain it away. He simply bowed his head for a brief moment before addressing the gathering. "The old records speak of this mark only once," he said. "It appears when courage chooses compassion over fear. It cannot be earned through power, inherited through blood, or claimed by force." The elders exchanged astonished glances. Several historians quietly nodded as forgotten fragments of ancient stories returned to memory. Elder Miriam slowly approached Evelyn, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Child," she whispered, "for 8 years we believed your silence was something to pity. We never imagined it was an act of extraordinary strength." Evelyn lowered her eyes, still overwhelmed by everything unfolding around her. "I was never strong," she answered honestly. "I was afraid every single day." Elder Miriam smiled gently. "Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing kindness while fear walks beside you." Those words settled warmly inside Evelyn's heart. Around the chamber, more members of the council stepped forward. One by one, they offered quiet apologies for the assumptions they had carried over the years. None of them attempted to erase the past. Instead, they acknowledged it with humility, allowing respect to replace misunderstanding. Families who had once looked at Evelyn with sympathy now looked upon her with admiration. Even the young Omegas standing near the back of the hall smiled through tears, seeing hope reflected in someone they had always believed was destined to remain invisible. Rowan removed the royal cloak fastened across his shoulders. It was woven from deep midnight blue fabric embroidered with silver threads that shimmered beneath the moonlit ceiling. Without ceremony or grand proclamation, he gently placed it around Evelyn's shoulders. The gesture was simple, yet its meaning echoed throughout the hall. No one mistook it for possession. It was protection freely offered and dignity publicly restored. Rowan looked toward every pack leader gathered before him. "Let every territory remember this night," he declared. "No gift given by the moon goddess should ever become a reason for fear. No soul should be forced to hide simply because others fail to understand what makes them different." His words were met not with applause but with solemn agreement. The atmosphere inside the palace had become something quieter and far more meaningful. It felt like a promise shared by every heart present. Evelyn gently touched the edge of the royal cloak, hardly believing it rested upon her shoulders. For the first time since childhood, she did not feel the need to make herself smaller. She stood exactly as she was, her voice no longer hidden, her past no longer a burden, and her future no longer defined by fear. As the silver light slowly faded into the warm glow of the chandeliers, a clear moonbeam slipped through the towering windows and illuminated the ancient altar at the center of the hall. Resting upon the polished stone was a second crescent pendant, identical to the one Evelyn now held, as though it had been waiting through countless seasons for this single night to arrive. The second crescent pendant rested upon the ancient altar, as though it had been waiting patiently through countless full moons for the one soul destined to stand before it. The silver moonbeam surrounding it grew brighter until the two pendants reflected one another across the quiet hall, filling the air with a gentle radiance that seemed to erase every lingering shadow. No voice broke the silence. No command was given. Every person present understood that this moment belonged to something greater than ceremony. Evelyn Carter slowly approached the altar, her footsteps calm and unhurried. She no longer walked like someone trying to disappear. She walked like someone finally willing to be seen. The royal cloak rested comfortably across her shoulders, but it was not the symbol of her transformation. The true change had already taken place inside her heart. She reached the altar and carefully placed her mother's pendant beside the second crescent. The moment they touched, both symbols shimmered softly before settling into perfect stillness. There was no flash of overwhelming magic, no dramatic display of power. Instead, a peaceful warmth spread through the hall, touching every heart with the quiet certainty that something long forgotten had finally returned. Rowan Ashford stepped beside her, leaving enough space to remind everyone that respect always came before authority. He looked at the two pendants and then toward the gathered packs. For generations, he said, our people searched for strength in the loudest voices and the fiercest warriors. Tonight the moon goddess reminded us that true strength often waits inside the gentlest heart. His words settled over the assembly like the first light of dawn. Elder Miriam smiled through grateful tears. History will remember this evening, she said softly, not because an ancient mark appeared, but because fear finally surrendered to compassion. The council members bowed their heads in quiet agreement. Parents gently embraced their children. Young Omegas looked toward Evelyn with hope instead of uncertainty. Even the oldest wolves present seemed lighter, as though they had laid down burdens they had carried for many years. Evelyn took a slow breath before speaking once more. Her voice was calm, warm, and filled with quiet confidence. I spent 8 years believing silence was the only way to protect the people I loved. Today I learned that courage does not always begin when we stop being afraid. Sometimes it begins when we finally trust that kindness is stronger than fear. No one answered immediately. They did not need to. The peaceful expression surrounding her revealed that every word had already found its place. Rowan offered his hand, not as a command, not as a claim, but as an invitation freely given. Evelyn smiled and accepted it without hesitation. Together they turned toward the towering palace doors where the first light of morning stretched across the mountains beyond Ashen Ridge. The stars slowly faded while the rising sun painted the sky with gentle shades of gold and silver, welcoming the beginning of a new day. Behind them, the two crescent pendants remained side by side upon the ancient altar, no longer separated by time, fear, or unanswered promises. And as the palace awoke beneath the quiet blessing of a new dawn, the people carried home a lesson they would pass from one generation to the next, that the greatest voices are not always the ones heard first, but the ones brave enough to speak when hope needs them most.